Hi folks, I'm John Whidden and this is my friend Steve McLeod. And today on This Sonic Obsession, I look back at one of the great vocalists of all time and the band that he was a member of for many, many years. Gary Brooker, one of the great vocalists of all time, 76 years old, recently passed away. Of course, Brooker was a member of one of the great bands of all time, Procol Harum, a singer, I don't think, who got his due with the general public. I think in music circles he was well admired, well respected, well loved. But generally speaking, I don't think a lot of people would probably know his name. I think most people would know his voice because if you haven't heard of Whiter Shade of Pale, I don't know where you've been because it came out of the gate back in 1967 and it's been continuously played over the years. And in fact, there are about 1,000 versions of the song, different cover versions out there. The single itself by Procol Harum sold 10 million copies. Think of that for a second. That is a lot. Anyway, Gary Brooker, one of the great vocalists of all time. I put him in a category with Sinatra, Aretha Franklin, Otis Redding. He's in that category as far as I'm concerned. Just a really good singer, a very distinctive voice, a very warm voice, a very soulful voice. Before Procol Harum, he played in an R&B group called the Paramounts. He never showed it or anything. It all just seemed so effortless. And it was just this beautiful voice saying these beautiful, poetic songs over the years in a number of albums. Procol Harum made albums right up until the last couple of years, off and on. Not all were great. I've heard most of them, but they did have mostly good tunes, even the latter ones. So, it wasn't like he stopped performing at a certain level because his voice was always at a certain level. I don't care what anybody says. You can put drum machines on it and that kind of thing, but his voice always stood out. To me, it's just a unique, great voice that will sorely be missed.
Well, yeah, and that debut album, self-titled Procol Harum, which, by the way, did not have Whiter Shade of Pale on it in the initial versions. It came out much later, or not much later, but on later versions, because after it became this monster, Whiter Shade of Pale became this monster hit. I can still remember where I was the first time I heard this song, which was so unique.
It was for those days, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there were very few bands that were producing stuff that made you were startled by how inventive they were and how ambitious they were. Maybe, certainly Pet Sounds before that. In 1966, Brian Wilson's music and some of the Beatles songs at the same time were like A Day in the Life, and that were just really startlingly inventive. And A Whiter Shade of Pale was like that. I can still remember the first time I ever heard it. Like a lot of kids in the 60s, my brother and I used to, play ping pong in the basement for hours on end, and we always had a transistor radio going. And the first time that came on the radio, we just stopped what we were doing and listened to it. And it was like, oh my God, what a great song,
Yeah.
And it truly was. And, a lot of people say, why isn't Procol Harum in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? They're not. Maybe they should be, but the song is.
Yeah, the song is, but the band isn't.
Yeah, it's just one of the most beautiful songs you will ever hear.
But Blondie is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So there we go.
Yeah, well, there's lots of bands.
There's lots of
That's
bands. The one that just springs to mind,
And it was just startlorchestral beautiful and a fantastic.
But it sounded classical. That was the thing,
And Procol Harum always did, right? They were very almost orchestral, even when it wasn't orchestral.
Right.
But we'll get into another album later of theirs that truly was orchestral. But this version of Procol Harum, it's a reissue by Classic Records that came out in 2003, I think. And it was one of the first albums, possibly the first album I bought when I started getting back into vinyl during that period. And it's the debut in mono, and by Classic Records, a defunct audiophile label. And it had it has the song lineup of the original British release, but they added this beautiful 33 and 45 RPM version of Whiter Shade of Pale on this incredible looking chunk of vinyl. And it is a fantastic album, and it really was unique and different from anything else that was really coming out at that time in 1967.
Well, I mean, the lyrics were extremely unique, but the sound, the music of the song was extremely unique too.
Yep.
I thought it was an orchestra, to be honest with you. It just had that big feel.
It had a big feel that really did sound like it should have had an orchestra.
Yeah,
and then of course we'll get to this album. Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, well, one of the I mean, the classic, or I guess the album that people say is the definitive album by Procol Harum is in the minds of a lot of people is A Salty Dog, which is a great album. Procol Harum, I don't think, made a bad album. Some obviously weren't as good as the others, but the first 3 or 4 albums, in my mind, are all classics. They're great. There's the self-titled one, Procol Harum. There is Shine On Brightly, I believe, was the second album.
And then Salty Dog.
A Salty Dog.
Was third.
And Broken Barricades. And then comes the album that you and I both really like, and this one broke new ground as well. It's Procol Harum with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra and the De Camera Singers, and of course it was recorded in Edmonton in 1972, I believe.
1971.
71, sorry.
Which really blew our little Canadian minds at the time, because stuff like that didn't happen in Canadian music. And it's like, what were they doing in Edmonton? This provincial.
Well, it was cold
city.
in Edmonton too. It was recorded in February, I believe.
No, it was recorded in I think it was November 18th.
Oh, November. Okay.
It still would have been cold in Edmonton.
Well, yes, exactly. Yeah, I don't know why I thought February, but
I lived in Alberta around that. Well, from 66 and 67, and I mean, you just couldn't imagine this happening. And how they ended up, of all the symphony orchestras in the world, why would you end up with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra?
Well, there was a guy that was interested, somebody that was associated with the orchestra was interested in performing with a band, and Procol Harum had performed in the Stratford Festival, I believe.
In Ontario.
In Ontario with an orchestra. Somehow this person ended up talking to Richie York, I believe this is the story, and Richie York at the time was a music writer in Canada, very good music writer, and then Holger Peterson got involved in it, and Holger Peterson was involved in radio, and I think still is. I think he still does a show for CBC.
Didn't he do a jazz show? Or
he does a blues jazz show, and he also runs or is involved in a record company called Stony Plain. So all of these factors came together. Procol Harum was interested in doing a concert with an orchestra because they had done the Stratford Festival. And anyway, all of these things combined, and the first thing you know, they're off to Edmonton.
With very little preparation.
Right.
I think Brooker was writing the arrangements for the orchestra.
I think he was doing them on the plane, wasn't he?
Just basically doing it at the last
minute.
And they get to Edmonton. They had very little in the way of rehearsal time. And it is just an incredible album. And the opening track, Conquistador,
which is from the first album.
Just absolutely mesmerizing with the orchestra. And it ended up becoming their second highest scoring single of all time.
Yeah.
I think it charted at 15 or something, which...
I thought it went even higher. Maybe in Canada it went higher, because I remember in Canada it was everywhere. It was a huge hit.
Yeah, just the novelty of it.
Yeah,
more than anything. And they literally did it with no rehearsal, and they went back and told the crowd they were going to do a couple songs again, and so there were no overdubs or anything, and it just came out magnificently. I can still hear the seagulls. For what is it? A whaling song? Is that what it's called?
Whaling Stories.
Whaling Stories.
Yeah,
the second song, and it was really remarkable, and it did in Canada I mean, it went gold in the States and that, but in Canada, it had this sort of notoriety because just the whole novelty of something like that happening in Canada and in this, northern clime, where in November it was probably 30 below zero.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But again, I don't think it was appreciated as much at the time as it has become appreciated. I know a friend of mine had it, and we listened to it constantly.
Yeah.
We loved it from the get-go. But I don't know, I can't remember what the critical reception was like at the time. I don't think it was great. I mean,
Yeah,
and when I say that, I mean in other places other than Canada, because I'm sure back then in Canada it was probably welcomed with open arms by the critics because, well, Richie York was one of the biggest critics at the time.
But it sold well in the States. It sold well in Canada. I don't think it, oddly enough, did as well in Britain at the time. But yeah, I mean, it's right up there with the great live albums, I think.
Yeah, and they didn't do a Whiter Shade of Pale.
They didn't do it,
which I always thought was kind of odd. But I've read over the years that they wanted to be, I guess what they really wanted to was to show another side of the band and not be just kind of known as the Whiter Shade of Pale band, which I can see that, but boy, I think I would have loved to have heard a version of that Whiter Shade of Pale with a full orchestra.
With an orchestra, yeah. It is surprising that it wasn't on there. And it was engineered by Wally Hyder, the great engineer, who brought his mobile unit up to Edmonton and recorded it, and it sounds tremendous.
Yeah. So it was unique in a lot of ways because he carted all that gear up from... Was Hyder in L.A. or San Francisco?
He was in California.
California, either San Francisco or L.A. So he took all the machinery up to Edmonton, and in November that wouldn't have been an easy trip.
Yeah, this was recorded at the North Alberta Auditorium, and you bet you didn't know this, but I played the North Alberta Auditorium.
Where's your live album?
Well, I don't think there was ever a recording, but I could be wrong. But the grade 5 class at Father Lacombe.
Whoa! Here we get some trivia, folks.
Elementary in Edmonton. We performed at a music festival in 1966. So we were there before Procol Harum.
Oh, you opened up for Procol Harum.
Yeah,
somewhat.
About 5 years earlier.
Okay. What did you play?
It was a choir.
Oh, it was a choir.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
one of these days, folks, I'll get Steve to share us his vocal ability.
I have no idea what we were singing or anything like that.
Okay.
But I remember sitting in this, and it was a big building. It was like 2,500 seats.
So, and there was
a soft seater.
There was one in Calgary called the Jubilee Auditorium, and it was comparable.
It's the Southern Alberta Auditorium. They were built at the same time, and I just read yesterday that it recently underwent like $100 million transformation because it opened in the late 50s.
I was there once too for a concert. It was beautiful, beautiful. So what's your favorite Procol Harum album?
I think it's the Edmonton with the Edmonton Symphony. I really love that album, and obviously the first one I like as well, but especially with a Whiter Shade of Pale on it.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think that's my favorite too. I really like Broken Barricades too, though. But Broken Barricades is kind of a different beast because it's a bit rockier. It's a bit harder edged, and I think that was the influence of Robin Trower, the great guitar player, who does not play on live in Edmonton. He left, and from what I've read over the years, he wasn't all that crazy about performing with an orchestra. That might have been one of the reasons that he left.
Yeah.
But once again, it's one of those bands that their first 4 or 5 albums, 6, I guess, you go into Home and trying to think of what came after Home, but there's the first album. There is A Salty Dog, Edmonton, live in Edmonton, Shine On Brightly, Broken Barricades, and Home. I think they're all great albums, and some of the ones they did later on were really good as well. Grand Hotel, Exotic Birds and Fruit. I mean, they all have their really strong moments. And that's why I think it's a sin that, well, first of all, they're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I think it's also a sin that Gary Brooker's vocals tend to get overlooked over time. Because I do put him in that category of great singers.
I think he was one of those guys that got better as the years went on. I think he was there's a version on YouTube of them doing Whiter Shade of Pale at a festival in Denmark a few years ago.
I've seen that. Parts of it,
with the orchestra in the back and everything. And his vocals in that are incredible for a guy who was, you know, he was probably about 70 years old at the time.
Well, I mean, he took some time off. Every once in a while, Procol Harum would take a break. He did perform with other groups. I mean, he played with Clapton.
He was on the concert for George.
Concert for George. He did Old Brown Shoe. That was the tribute concert to George Harrison. He played on Harrison's All Things Must Pass. Played with Ringo Starr's All-Star Band. So he was busy. He owned a pub, apparently just down the road from his home in England. And quite the fisherman, apparently, a fly fisherman. And did a lot of work involved with charities. So he kept busy. So maybe that's why his voice was still so strong. Maybe he just got off the road and...
Well, he wasn't a screamer either.
Wasn't a screamer. Well, that's the other thing,
So it was easy. His voice was very smooth. And they're often lumped Procol Harum in as a prog band. Although I can see elements of that. I mean, do you agree that they're...
I don't think they're a prog band, no. I think they're Procol Harum. I think they just had a very unique sound, and I think they were progressive, but they were progressive in the lyrics that were written for them by Keith Reid, and the music and the way they presented that music, because working with an orchestra was progressive in that sense, but not a prog group.
No.
I wouldn't put them in the same lump as ELP or Yes or
there's
anything
not crazy
like that.
time signatures and stuff like that. But I guess probably because of how good they sound with an orchestra, and the music was ambitious in that sense, you know, they get lumped in. But there's all kinds of bands that sort of get lumped into prog, and I don't quite understand. But they were certainly, you know, a great band, great band, and probably they don't get the recognition that they probably deserve.
Yeah, I mean, look at the musicians that came through that band. I mean, you've got Matthew Fisher on keyboards, or on organ.
Hammond B3.
B3. He was a tremendous organ player. Well, listen to Whiter Shade of Pale. And a lot of people mistake. They think maybe that Brooker was the organ player, but it was actually Matthew Fisher for the most part, anyway. And Robin Trower on guitar, great guitar, just a tremendous guitar player. Went on to a solo career,
but nothing in Procol Harum's catalog during his time would prepare you for what he became.
No.
You know, as a
well, Broken Barricades kind of hints at that. Like he wants to get a little bit heavier. He was a big fan of Jimi Hendrix. That's very evident with albums like Bridge of Sighs and Twice Removed from Yesterday. Both, you know, great albums. He did a lot of really good stuff. B.J. Wilson was just a powerhouse drummer. Not, I don't think, the same way that you'd look at Ginger Baker, John Bonham, Keith Moon. Not like that. Not bombastic, and, you know, not this huge sound, but a real full sound. And I saw him live once with Joe Cocker, and I was looking at him, I was thinking, okay, I know that drummer from somewhere. So anyway, I checked. This was at a club here in Halifax. So I went and checked, and sure enough, it was B.J. Wilson. He toured with Cocker for a few years, but just drove the band that night. Just a powerhouse, just kind of, you know, making sure that the beat was there and the beat was out front. And once again, he was the same with Procol Harum. But like Brooker's vocals, while he was very powerful on drums, he wasn't overbearing like so many drummers from that era were. So just a great band. So that's our look back at and our remembrance of Gary Brooker, the keyboard player, piano player, and songwriter for Procol Harum, one of the great vocalists of all time. And of course, a look back at the music of Procol Harum on this Sonic Obsession. And we do want to point out that this year, in May, it will be the 50th anniversary of the release of the album that we talked about quite a bit, Procol Harum, live with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra. And if you haven't heard it, please check it out, because it's just a great album, a powerful album. Anyway, thanks very much for watching this Sonic Obsession.